What if the biggest lie Meghan Markle ever told just came from her own mother, live, on camera? The lights were dim, the studio audience murmuring in anticipation, and then, almost like the flipping of a global switch, the words that dropped from Doria Ragland's mouth shattered the carefully curated identity Meghan Markle had woven for years. It wasn't delivered with malice. It wasn't wrapped in a tabloid smear campaign. It came directly, calmly, and unmistakably from the lips of the one woman who knew Meghan better than any biographer, journalist, or royal analyst ever could, her mother. And what she said didn't just challenge a minor detail. It ignited an international firestorm. "There's no Nigerian blood in our line," Doria stated flatly. She made that up. None of our ancestors trace back to West Africa. Before we continue, please like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for updates. In an era where identity can define careers, political leverage, and entire brands, this was more than a bombshell. It was a public detonation of one of the most sensitive narratives tied to Meghan's public image, the claim that she was 43% Nigerian. A claim that, until now, had gone largely unchallenged. It was mentioned on her own podcast as a proud discovery. It made headlines. It was praised in Nigerian circles. It was analyzed, celebrated, and used to deepen her alignment with global Black communities. And now, it had been torched by the very woman who brought her into this world. So the question that millions found themselves asking wasn't just whether Meghan lied. The deeper, more disturbing question became, why? This story begins not just with a single quote, but with a broader movement of identity marketing that has taken hold in politics, media, and celebrity culture. Meghan Markle has, for years, been at the epicenter of a public and royal saga involving race, class, and privilege. Her marriage to Prince Harry was once hailed as a revolutionary moment for the historically white British monarchy. Her appearance on Oprah, filled with allegations of racism within royal circles, only solidified her position as a symbol of resistance. And her claim of being 43% Nigerian felt, to many, like an extension of that narrative. It placed her not just within the African diaspora, but within its cultural center. It was a claim that gave her an additional layer of credibility in social justice circles, particularly when pushing back against royal bigotry and media bias. But now, with a single televised statement from Doria, that foundation is trembling. The simplicity of the phrase masked its impact. It wasn't framed as a correction. It was framed as a complete rejection. And unlike the many other controversies involving Meghan Markle, whether about staff bullying, royal protocol disputes, or Netflix narratives, this one hits at the root of something far deeper: authenticity. Doria's revelation wasn't made on a trashy tabloid stage. It wasn't yelled over a table during a family dispute. It was issued on air, in front of cameras, during a conversation that was supposed to center around healing, honesty, and maternal insight. The moment she dropped the truth, even the host didn't know where to look. And within minutes, clips of the interview were already ricocheting across social media platforms. The quote was short, but the consequences were enormous. Why does this matter? Because in a world where racial identity has been weaponized, commodified, and politicized, accuracy isn't just a personal issue. It's a public responsibility, especially when the person making the claim is using it to build a multi-million-dollar empire. And Meghan did just that. Her Nigerian claim became central to her cultural appeal in post-royal life. She leaned into it during podcast episodes, used it during press runs, and reportedly explored branding opportunities in Nigeria. There were even talks among fashion insiders that Meghan was in discussions to front campaigns for Afrocentric fashion brands. Why wouldn't she? With a royal title and Nigerian heritage, she was seen by many as the ultimate bridge between modern aristocracy and African excellence. But if Doria is telling the truth and multiple genealogical experts now say the math never added up, then what exactly is Meghan trying to sell to the public? We're not talking about a simple error in family tree tracing. We're talking about a claim that was offered publicly, repeatedly, and without evidence. A claim now disavowed by the only person on the maternal line capable of confirming or denying it. A claim that many now believe was used to co-opt identity, emotion, and influence, all under the banner of cultural solidarity. And make no mistake, identity politics is not a game of Monopoly. It's a deeply personal and political experience for millions of people who fight every day to preserve their heritage, confront racism, and assert their rightful space in the global conversation. To fake or exaggerate a connection to a particular culture isn't just tone deaf. It's exploitative. and it echoes a long, painful history of outsiders trying to wear blackness as a costume, a brand, a trend, only to discard it when inconvenient. This moment isn't about Meghan versus her mother. It's about the cost of pretending to be something you're not when so many people are still punished for being exactly who they are. As we peel back the layers of this controversy, you'll see how a single DNA claim spiraled into a full-blown media crisis. We'll examine how DNA tests can be misunderstood or even manipulated. We'll speak to experts who have analyzed Meghan's known family tree and who believe the Nigerian claim was mathematically impossible. We'll investigate the cultural damage caused by such fabrications and look at the broader implications for celebrity influence on racial identity. This video isn't about canceling Meghan Markle. It's about asking real questions about truth, trust, and responsibility. Did Meghan lie? Or was she herself misled by faulty DNA science? Why would she double down on a figure so specific, 43%, if there was any chance it could be refuted? Was this a marketing decision made by advisors, or a personal desire to belong? And why, after years of silence, did Doria Ragland finally speak out? These are not rhetorical questions. These are the central riddles at the heart of a media firestorm now engulfing one of the most recognizable women on Earth. So stay with us. Because by the end of this video, you won't just understand the controversy, you'll understand the stakes. And you may never see Meghan Markle the same way again. Before we begin dissecting Meghan's original claim and the science behind DNA tests, remember this. In a world where facts are negotiable and image is currency, there is still something sacred about the truth. Let's find it. It was October 2022, during an episode of Meghan Markle's podcast Archetypes, when the world paused for a beat, stunned by a seemingly spontaneous confession. Sitting with Nigerian-American actress Sayo Fumudo, Meghan dropped a revelation that instantly became headline news. With a confident tone and a hint of theatrical curiosity, she said, "I just had my genealogy done a couple years ago. I'm 43% Nigerian." The statement was delivered with the precision of someone who knew exactly what she was doing, infusing identity, surprise, and a subtle message of empowerment all in one phrase. The podcast had already positioned itself as a platform for breaking down stereotypes. Each episode explored labels often placed on women, like diva, crazy, or angry black woman, and offered listeners a mix of personal anecdotes, celebrity guests, and Meghan's reflections on her own experiences. But none of the previous discussions came close to matching the viral weight of the Nigerian ancestry comment. In a matter of hours, the quote was plastered across digital newsrooms and social media timelines. Outlets from CNN to BBC, from Essence to The Guardian, picked up the story. Nigerian Twitter erupted with memes, messages of welcome, jokes about Meghan's honorary citizenship, and even playful commentary about royal blood finally linking to Nigerian roots. The phrase, "Meghan is 43% Nigerian," was soon trending globally. It was the kind of moment celebrities dream of: instant connection, community praise, and cultural currency. But beneath the celebration, some voices began to murmur. How did she come to such a precise number? Why was the claim only now being made, despite years of media scrutiny into her background? And, most importantly, was it even true? To understand the ripple effect of that single podcast moment, we need to rewind and examine the stage that was carefully set before it. When Meghan Markle first entered the global spotlight, the framing was delicate. She was described as biracial, the daughter of a white lighting director and a black social worker. Her skin tone, appearance, and mannerisms had led to years of navigating between racial perceptions in Hollywood. In earlier interviews during her time on Suits, Meghan had occasionally spoken about the challenges of being not black enough for black roles and not white enough for white ones. But she rarely leaned deeply into one identity category. That changed dramatically after marrying into the British royal family. Once within the royal framework, Meghan's racial identity was weaponized by sections of the UK tabloid press. Headlines questioned everything from her background to her suitability for royal life. The infamous moment when Meghan and Harry revealed that a royal family member had concerns about their unborn child's skin tone sent shockwaves around the world. From that moment on, Meghan's blackness became a central focus of her public narrative, both a shield against racist treatment and a badge of belonging for those who saw her as a modern icon. So when she declared a nearly 50% Nigerian ancestry on her podcast, it felt like the perfect culmination of this transformation. It gave her a precise African connection, something even more specific and geographically powerful than a vague identification with the African-American experience. Nigeria is not just any African country. It is Africa's most populous nation, its largest economy, and its cultural powerhouse. Nollywood, Afrobeats, and a massive diaspora across the UK and the US have elevated Nigeria's visibility on the world stage. Claiming a Nigerian heritage wasn't just culturally resonant, it was strategic. Many listeners didn't question it. Why would they? The use of DNA ancestry tests had become common practice among celebrities and regular folks alike. Millions had spat into test tubes and mailed their saliva to private companies promising to decode their genetic roots. If Meghan said 43% Nigerian, most assumed it came from such a test. That's where the story deepens. Behind the scenes, multiple genealogists who specialize in African-American ancestry started combing through public records, census data, and historical archives. Several of them had already traced Meghan's roots back to enslaved families in Georgia and South Carolina. The names, the plantations, and the migration patterns were documented. While African-American ancestry often includes West African origins due to the transatlantic slave trade, the precise pinpointing of a 43% Nigerian ancestry raised flags. One genealogist, speaking anonymously, explained that such specificity is difficult to determine accurately. Commercial DNA companies often generalize West African DNA as Nigerian simply because Nigeria contains diverse ethnic markers, and they have a larger customer base there. In truth, a significant portion of African-American DNA labeled as Nigerian might come from surrounding regions like Benin, Togo, Ghana, or Cameroon. And the percentage itself, 43%, is unusually high for someone of mixed European and African-American ancestry. Adding to the skepticism was the lack of follow-up. Meghan never released the test. She never mentioned the name of the company, the process, or even any family members who might have been tied to that region. There was no documentation, no deeper discussion, no elaboration in future interviews. The story popped and vanished. Still, the cultural momentum was irreversible. Online influencers with Nigerian heritage began inviting Meghan to come home. Nigerian apparel brands posted edits of her in traditional gele head wraps. Even government figures hinted at rolling out red carpet welcomes should she ever visit. But not everyone was cheering. A growing number of cultural critics began quietly raising concerns about how easy it had become for celebrities to latch onto African heritage when it was convenient. They pointed out that while millions of real Nigerians faced xenophobia abroad, unstable political systems at home, and the lingering trauma of colonial exploitation, Meghan's declaration was met with luxury, applause, and global adoration. Was she, knowingly or not, leveraging African identity as a PR tactic? Some drew parallels to past incidents. Rachel Dolezal, a white woman who claimed to be black and led an NAACP chapter, or Jessica Krug, a professor who passed as Afro-Latina. While Meghan is of mixed race and does have African ancestry, the fear among critics was that the specificity of the Nigerian claim was not born of authentic cultural connection but of marketable storytelling. Even more troubling to skeptics was the way the claim was made, with flair, but no follow-through. Nigerian historians and genealogists offered to help Meghan trace her roots further, but no response was ever reported. Invitations to visit Nigerian universities or attend cultural festivals were left unanswered. For a woman who once took a photo outside the gate of her ancestral home in Georgia for a documentary, the lack of interest in tracing Nigerian ancestors, if they existed, was conspicuous. Then came the turning point. Months after the podcast buzz had cooled, and after numerous events where Meghan leaned into African fashion or spoke broadly about being a woman of color, Doria Ragland appeared on a daytime interview show. In what was supposed to be a relaxed conversation about motherhood, mindfulness, and dealing with fame, the host casually asked Doria how she felt when Meghan shared the Nigerian ancestry discovery. Doria paused. Then, with deliberate calm, she said something that left the room still. "I don't know where she got 43% Nigerian. We're not Nigerian. She made that up. None of our ancestors trace back to West Africa." The internet erupted. People who had defended Meghan for years suddenly found themselves scrambling to explain what just happened. Was Doria misinformed? Had Meghan done a different type of test Doria wasn't aware of? Was this a private family issue now made explosively public? But Doria didn't stutter. She didn't walk it back. And the credibility she carried. Gentle, rarely seen, and always silent in Meghan's battles, made her words land with crushing finality. In the days that followed, journalists began to re-examine Meghan's statement. Multiple experts confirmed that without transparency into the testing process, it was impossible to validate such a claim. And with Doria's flat denial, the burden of proof was now on Meghan. But she remained silent. The silence was deafening. For many, this chapter marked the beginning of a new reckoning. It was no longer just about whether Meghan had Nigerian ancestry. It was about trust. If someone is willing to embellish or invent ethnic identity for personal gain, what else are they willing to invent? This question hangs in the air even now. The origins of the 43% claim are murky, the justification never offered, and the confirmation denied by the only family member who could have verified it with any personal history. In the world of celebrity, image is everything. But sometimes, the mask slips. And when it does, the truth doesn't need to scream, it only needs to whisper. For months, the world had heard whispers of tension behind the scenes between Meghan Markle and her mother, Doria Ragland. Nothing confirmed, nothing overt, just a growing sense that something wasn't quite right. Doria, once a consistent and supportive presence at Meghan's public events, had become more elusive. She rarely gave interviews. She remained silent during the family's most turbulent public moments, including the explosive Oprah sit-down, the release of Harry's memoir, and the backlash from the Netflix documentary series. Her silence had come to represent something sacred: loyalty. So when she finally agreed to an interview, live, unfiltered, and broadcast to millions, no one expected what came next. The setting was disarmingly calm. A midday talk show known for emotional segments and feel-good stories had invited Doria for what the host described as a deeply personal conversation about identity, motherhood, and finding peace in chaos. Meghan was not present, nor was Harry. It was Doria, seated alone in a soft beige chair, bathed in gentle lighting, wearing a simple dress with minimal makeup. Her voice, as always, was warm, but steady. At first, the conversation was tame. They spoke about raising Meghan as a single mother, the experience of being thrust into the royal spotlight, and the pressure of public life. Doria smiled at times. She even laughed when recalling Meghan's stubbornness as a child. Then came the moment. The host leaned in slightly, glancing down at a cue card before asking. One of the things Meghan said that really resonated with so many people, particularly in the Black and Nigerian communities, was that she discovered she's 43% Nigerian. Did that surprise you? There was a pause. A long, thoughtful pause. Doria took a breath, her eyes searching the ceiling briefly as if trying to decide just how much to say. And then, in the kind of sentence that doesn't scream but rather cuts cleanly through noise, she said, "I don't know where she got 43% Nigerian. We're not Nigerian. She made that up. None of our ancestors trace back to West Africa." The silence that followed was thunderous. Even the host, seasoned, composed, a veteran of difficult interviews, seemed momentarily stunned. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. The camera panned to the audience, where viewers looked visibly shaken. A few gasped. Others blinked in confusion. Was this a miscommunication? Did Doria mean to say something else? Was this an inside joke taken out of context? But Doria's tone made it clear. She meant every word. She didn't flinch. She didn't soften the blow with a laugh or a follow-up excuse. She sat upright, hands folded in her lap, as if finally letting go of a weight she had carried far too long. It was not said with cruelty. It was said with finality. Within 10 minutes of the interview airing, clips flooded the internet. News sites scrambled to publish urgent headlines. Social media exploded with hashtags like hashtag Doria Speaks, hashtag DNAgate, and hashtag 43%lie. Online debates turned brutal. Sussex supporters clung to the idea that Doria was misinformed or perhaps misunderstood the question. Others declared this the definitive moment Meghan's public narrative began to collapse. For many viewers, Doria's confession marked the first time a member of Meghan's inner circle broke ranks. Until now, critics of Meghan had always been outside observers, tabloid columnists, estranged relatives, or royal commentators with questionable motives. But Doria had always been portrayed as the rock, the steady hand, the only one who truly understood Meghan's heart. Doria's quote was played on cable news loops. International outlets translated and broadcast it with subtitles. Nigerian newspapers and talk shows cover the story with the seriousness of a diplomatic betrayal. And royal commentators, who had long accused Meghan of manipulating racial identity to gain sympathy and media clout, now had what they believed to be irrefutable proof. Suddenly, Meghan's entire brand was under scrutiny. Her previous statements about racial identity were reanalyzed. Her podcast episode was rewatched, slowed down, examined for any caveat or admission of uncertainty. But there was none. She had said, with confidence, "I'm 43% Nigerian." She had framed it as a scientific revelation from a DNA test. And now, her own mother had called it fiction. Behind closed doors, insiders say Meghan was furious. According to a former staffer who spoke to a US-based tabloid under condition of anonymity, Meghan allegedly felt betrayed. She had not been informed that Doria was planning to do the interview, and she certainly had no idea her mother would publicly disavow one of her most celebrated identity claims. According to that source, Meghan attempted to contact Doria immediately after the segment aired, but was met with silence. There are even rumors that Meghan's legal team considered issuing a statement to clarify the DNA claim, but were ultimately advised to remain quiet to avoid drawing more attention to the contradiction. Meanwhile, other members of the Markle family, who had previously accused Meghan of dishonesty and manipulation, emerged with renewed confidence. Thomas Markle, Meghan's estranged father, was reportedly approached by multiple media outlets for comment. Though he declined to speak directly on the matter, one close associate claimed Thomas had long believed Meghan fabricated or exaggerated elements of her background to suit her public image. Meghan's half-sister, Samantha Markle, who had previously accused Meghan of being a social climber and a master of reinvention, posted cryptic tweets hinting that Doria had finally confirmed what she had said all along. But the most surprising reactions came not from the usual critics, but from once loyal fans who felt personally deceived. Many in the Black diaspora had embraced Meghan not just as a royal bride but as a symbol. They had defended her against racist headlines. They had seen in her a reflection of their own struggles with acceptance, marginalization, and code-switching. To now hear that the Nigerian connection may have been fabricated felt like a betrayal of trust. It wasn't just about a number. It was about representation, about being seen. And when that representation turned out to be potentially fraudulent, it stung in a way few could describe. Numerous think pieces followed. Writers debated whether Meghan's actions constituted cultural appropriation. Academics chimed in, exploring how blackness has become both a burden and a currency in Western pop culture. And television panels hosted intense discussions around the ethics of identity performance, when it's empowering and when it becomes exploitative. In all of this, Doria remained silent. After that interview, she gave no follow-up statement. She did not clarify her words. She did not apologize. She simply vanished back into the quiet privacy she had maintained for most of her life. Some speculated that Doria's decision to speak out was rooted in moral clarity, that perhaps she had grown tired of watching her daughter fabricate stories or bend truths or manipulate narratives for public sympathy. Others believed it was a strategic move, a quiet act of self-preservation in an increasingly tangled web of deception. A few even whispered about the possibility of a book deal or a memoir on the horizon. Whatever the motive, the impact was seismic. From a single sentence, the public perception of Meghan Markle shifted dramatically. What had once been a story of resilience, of a biracial woman breaking barriers in a rigid monarchy, now carried the uncomfortable stain of a possible lie. And worse, it was a lie about race, arguably the most sensitive, painful, and political subject of modern public discourse. If Meghan had exaggerated or invented her Nigerian heritage, what else might she have inflated? Was the racism she experienced within the palace as severe as she claimed? Were the stories told in the Netflix documentary and Spotify podcasts entirely authentic? The house of cards many believed had been built on victimhood and marginalization was beginning to tremble. And it all started with Doria Ragland, soft-spoken, loyal, reserved, deciding to say one true thing. Not loudly, not angrily, just plainly, "We're not Nigerian." As the dust began to settle from Doria Ragland's startling live television statement, a new battlefield emerged, one not governed by emotion or opinion, but by data, algorithms, and scientific analysis. If Meghan Markle's now infamous 43% Nigerian heritage claim had any foundation in fact, the proof would be found in the cold, clinical world of genetics. In the days following Doria's remarks, DNA experts across the globe were pulled into the center of an unfolding controversy, asked to dissect and verify or debunk what had become a key pillar of Meghan's public identity. DNA ancestry testing has become a household trend over the past decade. From spit-in-a-tube kits ordered online to full genome mapping, the market is booming with companies like 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, MyHeritage, and African Ancestry promising to trace your roots and tell you where your ancestors came from. It's marketed as a deeply personal journey, a way to connect with the past and understand oneself better. But beneath the surface lies a murky landscape of assumptions, margin of error, and statistical probabilities dressed up as definitive truths. To get to the heart of Meghan's claim, it's necessary to understand how these DNA tests work. Dr. Aaron Phillips, a senior geneticist from the University of Michigan and an expert in population genetics, explained that when someone says they're 43% Nigerian, what they are actually referencing is a company's algorithmic estimate based on a limited sample size of regional genetic markers. Most companies use reference panels, collections of DNA from various populations around the world, to compare customer samples. But these panels are not all-inclusive. Nigeria alone is home to more than 250 ethnic groups and hundreds of unique genetic profiles. A company might only have a few dozen samples from each group, if that. When someone's DNA is compared to those samples, the system looks for similarities and assigns a percentage match. It's not an exact science. It's a prediction model. Dr. Phillips was quick to caution that 43% is extremely specific and suspiciously high for someone with Meghan's background. As someone of biracial descent, with one white parent and one African-American parent, Meghan's African genetic percentage would most commonly fall between 30 to 45% in total. For nearly all African Americans, those African genes are scattered across multiple regions due to the forced migration and mixing during slavery. To have nearly all of that ancestry come from just one modern-day nation is statistically rare. It's more likely, he said, that Meghan's African ancestry is a blend of several West African regions: Ghana, Benin, Senegal, Cameroon, and yes, Nigeria, but not 43% from Nigeria alone. That number, in his words, suggests either a significant overestimation by the algorithm or a misrepresentation of what the test actually indicated. In other words, the science doesn't back it up. Several analysts across ancestry research forums went further. Using known data from the Markle-Ragland family tree, already publicly available through historical records, census data, and slave registries, they were able to reconstruct a probable ancestry pattern for Meghan. Her maternal lineage traces back to African-American communities in Georgia, Mississippi, and Tennessee, all of which were hubs for enslaved Africans. However, slave records rarely identify specific African ethnic origins. Africans were taken from all over West Africa and renamed, stripped of tribal affiliations, and blended across regions. Therefore, unless Meghan took an extremely rare and expensive mitochondrial DNA test tracing direct maternal ancestry to a single African woman, her claim would have been based on commercial test assumptions, not hard genealogical evidence. Adding to the skepticism, neither Meghan nor her team ever disclosed which company conducted her test. No screenshots, no reports, no expert commentary followed the podcast episode. When most public figures share stunning ancestry news, they often use it as a platform for deeper cultural exploration or engagement with their heritage. Meghan did not. Beyond the podcast statement, she offered no educational follow-up, no mention of tribal identity, no ancestral village, no historical family linkage to Nigeria, only the number. That number, 43%, seemed to exist in isolation, untethered from the kind of evidence that would give it credibility. Dr. Eliza Adebayo, a Nigerian-born geneticist and historian based in the UK, expressed particular concern. In an open letter published in a respected African diaspora journal, she wrote that while she appreciated any effort to reconnect people of African descent to their roots, she was troubled by what appeared to be the commercialization of African identity. In her words, to say one is Nigerian is to inherit not just bloodlines, but histories, responsibilities, and the right to speak on behalf of a people. If that claim is false or exaggerated, then it is not just inaccurate. It is exploitative. Her letter was met with a mixed response. Some accused her of gatekeeping identity. Others praised her courage in defending Nigerian cultural authenticity against what they saw as opportunistic appropriation. Meanwhile, African-American scholars weighed in on another angle, the risk of reducing blackness to a percentage. Dr. Kareem Johnson, a sociologist specializing in African American identity, emphasized how the obsession with DNA percentages could ironically reinforce the same biological essentialism that civil rights leaders fought to dismantle. In his words, you don't need a number to validate your blackness. But when a public figure leans on a number to legitimize a specific ethnic claim, that number better be accurate. Otherwise, it's a tool of manipulation. This argument got to the heart of the controversy. If Meghan had said she discovered she had Nigerian ancestry, full stop, few would have objected. That's a broad and inclusive statement. But to claim a very specific and unusually high percentage suggests either a misunderstanding of the science or a deliberate branding decision. A former PR strategist who once worked with Archewell, Meghan and Harry's foundation, hinted anonymously that the Nigerian ancestry claim was strategically timed. According to her, Meghan's team had been preparing a cultural rebranding post-royal exit that involved deeper alignment with African and African American audiences. Nigeria, being a cultural juggernaut, was the most appealing connection. In this strategist's view, the ancestry test was less a personal journey and more of a calculated narrative asset. None of this was confirmed, but it began to shift the public's perception of Meghan's intentions. The use of DNA as a form of social currency, especially in celebrity culture, has become increasingly common. Stars like Oprah Winfrey, Whoopi Goldberg, and Henry Louis Gates Jr. have publicly explored their African roots, often through television specials and educational programming. But in those cases, the exploration was transparent, data-backed, and deeply contextualized. Meghan's 43% Nigerian claim, by contrast, appeared casually inserted into a podcast conversation and never revisited. More troubling was how quickly it was accepted by the public. Social media rewarded the statement with viral love, fashion brands offered collaborations, and Nigerian politicians offered diplomatic invites. The claim helped reinforce Meghan's image as a global woman of color standing up to Western elitism. It allowed her to stand in two worlds, royalty and resistance. But now, with the scientific doubts piling up and Doria's denial hanging in the air, that bridge between image and truth is collapsing. DNA analysts continue to ask the same question. Why 43%? Not 40? Not 45? Why such a precise number? The answer, some suspect, lies not in the science, but in the strategy. The number is high enough to sound significant, but just below half to maintain biracial ambiguity. It's specific enough to sound scientific, yet vague enough to avoid scrutiny. In marketing terms, it's a sweet spot. But in genetic terms, it's highly questionable. And if it turns out to be false, or even a distortion, then the consequences go far beyond one individual's image. It risks damaging public trust in DNA testing, undermining real cultural connection efforts, and reinforcing the idea that African identity is something to be claimed only when it benefits one's brand. As of now, Meghan has not produced the DNA report. She has not offered clarification. Her team has issued no statement. And Doria, once again, has gone silent. In the absence of hard evidence, the experts remain firm in their conclusions. The science does not support Meghan Markle's claim to being 43% Nigerian. And unless she provides full transparency, the burden of proof remains squarely on her shoulders. What began as a feel-good cultural revelation has now become a case study in how data can be spun into a seductive narrative, and how quickly that narrative can unravel when the truth steps into the spotlight. In the entertainment capital of the world, identity isn't just a reflection of who someone is, it's a commodity. It's a sellable trait, a point of branding, and in many cases, a tool of access. The rise and dominance of Meghan Markle in the global conversation was never just about her royal marriage. It was about the convergence of race, fame, trauma, and power in an industry that thrives on narratives more than it does on truth. And in that ecosystem, blackness, particularly when conveniently curated, has become one of Hollywood's most profitable storylines. Before Meghan married Prince Harry, she was Rachel Zane on the television series Suits, a character that, for many years, was written and marketed as racially ambiguous. During her early acting years, Meghan auditioned mostly for roles that aligned with a more ethnically neutral look. The media rarely referred to her as black or biracial. She was just another rising actress trying to find her footing in a highly competitive industry. Hollywood had always had a complicated relationship with race. For decades, it either ignored the existence of nuanced black stories or flattened them into caricatures. Black actresses were often cast in narrow roles, the sassy best friend, the domestic worker, the angry woman, or the hypersexual figure. There was rarely space for multifaceted, refined, intellectually sharp black women who existed outside those tropes. And for biracial actresses, the dilemma became even more layered. They were often pushed to pick a side, to lean into their whiteness for broader appeal or their blackness for political relevance. Meghan, by all accounts, leaned into ambiguity until the crown entered the picture. Once she became part of the royal family, race exploded into the narrative. British tabloids sensationalized her background. Headlines dripped with subtle, and sometimes overt, racism. Discussions about whether she was too American or too outspoken often concealed deeper anxieties about race and class. And in those attacks, Meghan found her new identity, not just as an actress or a royal, but as a woman of color challenging one of the most conservative institutions in the modern world. Her blackness became a shield, a weapon, a selling point. She was no longer just Meghan from Suits. She was a biracial duchess who defied the monarchy. She was the woman who exposed the racist undercurrent of Buckingham Palace. She was the mother of the first mixed-race child born into the British royal family. And to a world hungry for representation, she became a symbol of progress, pain, and possibility. But identity in Hollywood is rarely left untouched by corporate hands. Meghan's team of strategists, publicists, and content creators understood something that many viewers did not, that every racial label, every cultural alignment, and every moment of vulnerability could be curated for impact. In a media landscape where authenticity is both demanded and doubted, what matters most isn't what's true, it's what sells. When Meghan declared herself 43% Nigerian, it wasn't just a factoid. It was a signal, a declaration that she belonged to a broader cultural tribe, one with roots, rhythm, power, and pride. Nigeria, in the global cultural hierarchy, is not a passive African identity. It is loud, proud, fashionable, intellectual, musical, political, and deeply connected to diaspora identity. Claiming Nigeria wasn't just a nod to heritage. It was a bold alignment with a powerhouse nation whose global influence extends from Hollywood to the halls of international diplomacy. Fashion designers from Lagos have been dominating runways in Paris. Nollywood produces more films annually than Hollywood. Nigerian musicians fill stadiums in London, New York, and Dubai. Nigerian thinkers shape academic discourse, and Nigerian literature holds space in elite university curricula. The country's diaspora is highly educated, politically active, and fiercely proud. To align with Nigeria, even symbolically, is to ride a cultural wave few other African nations can match. And Meghan's team understood that. According to insiders familiar with Archwell's branding discussions, there were talks, albeit early stage, of possible cultural partnerships with Nigerian designers, documentaries on African identity, and events that could position Meghan as a global voice on race and representation. Sources claimed that the 43% figure was seen as a bridge into a deeper level of identity storytelling that could resonate across continents. And it did, briefly. The Nigerian public responded with warmth and enthusiasm. Social media in Nigeria lit up with celebratory posts, memes, and jokes. People called her Sister Meg, and hashtags like Meghan our Nigerian Queen trended. There were even unconfirmed reports that the Nigerian government considered offering her an honorary cultural title. Nigerian publications published features connecting Meghan's personality to various ethnic groups, debating whether she was more Yoruba or Igbo. It was identity cosplay at scale. But what happens when that cosplay isn't backed by truth? The entertainment industry has always walked a dangerous line between homage and appropriation. From white artists borrowing black music to non-Latina actors playing Latina roles, the history is littered with examples of people profiting from cultures they do not belong to. And in recent years, there has been a growing demand for accountability. Audiences want authenticity. They want representation, not exploitation. And Meghan's Nigerian claim, once celebrated, now risked being recast as an opportunistic lie. The backlash didn't just come from geneticists or historians. It came from those who had welcomed her into the culture. Young Nigerian women who once saw her as an aspirational figure now asked difficult questions. How could someone claim their bloodline without walking their streets? Without learning their languages, eating their food, or honoring their stories? In Nigeria, ancestry is sacred. Tribes are not abstract ideas. They are lived realities with deep histories, spiritual practices, and family obligations. To claim Nigerian heritage is to inherit not just a story, but a responsibility. And to fabricate that claim or exaggerate it feels like a theft. One Nigerian influencer with nearly 1 million followers posted a video the day after Doria Ragland's interview aired. She said, "Meghan, if you're not Nigerian, why did you say it? You know our pain. You know how the world looks at us. You know how we fight to be heard. So why pretend? Why wear our skin like a costume? This isn't a brand. It's our blood." The video was shared thousands of times. The sentiment echoed across platforms. A hashtag calling for Meghan to clarify her statement gained traction. Petitions began circulating demanding she either provide the DNA report or publicly retract the claim. Behind the scenes, public relations experts were panicking. The Archwell brand had been built on progressive values: honesty, advocacy, transparency. This scandal was a direct threat to that foundation. And Meghan's refusal to respond only deepened suspicions. Her silence was read not as dignity, but as strategy. The kind of silence that powerful people use when they're hoping a scandal will blow over. But it didn't. The scandal began to affect more than just her image. Deals that were once in discussion quietly stalled. Invitations to speak at identity-centered events dried up. Black women who had defended her from racist attacks found themselves grappling with betrayal. And Hollywood, an industry where perception is reality, began to shift its gaze. In meetings and casting discussions, Meghan's name no longer carried the same halo. She was still powerful, still famous, but no longer untouchable. Her story had always been polarizing, but now, for the first time, even her most loyal base was divided. To understand how this happened, one must acknowledge how race functions in Hollywood not just as a point of pride, but as a point of marketing. Casting directors often search for people of color to fill roles, but those roles come with expectations. A black woman should have a certain cadence, a certain look, a certain struggle. A biracial woman, especially one with a white parent, occupies a complex space. Hollywood often rewards ambiguity. It allows executives to tick diversity boxes without fully committing to authentic cultural representation. Meghan was the perfect face for this era. Polished, articulate, fashionable, and with just enough cultural cash to be marketed as inclusive without challenging the industry's deep-rooted biases. But when she leaned fully into blackness, particularly African specificity, without a clear connection, it exposed a wider industry flaw. Too often, blackness is performed rather than lived in Hollywood. It becomes a filter added to an Instagram photo, a quote dropped into an award speech, a hairstyle worn for a shoot, or a region claimed on a podcast. And while the public may cheer initially, the truth always demands a reckoning. For Meghan, the reckoning came not from tabloids or trolls, but from the very people who had once lifted her up. And so, the business of being black in Hollywood, once her shield and strategy, began to crumble. It's not that Meghan isn't black. She is. Her mother is African American. Her experiences are real. But blackness is not a monolith, and Nigerian identity is not a footnote in a marketing strategy. It is a nation, a people, and a legacy. And when that legacy is invoked dishonestly, even with good intentions, it wounds the very people it seeks to honor. What this chapter of Meghan Markle's story reveals is not just a personal misstep, it's a cultural cautionary tale. That in a world where identity can be monetized, the line between representation and exploitation is razor thin. And when that line is crossed, no amount of fame, philanthropy, or royal lineage can undo the damage. Before Doria Ragland's on-air confession became global headline news, she was something of an enigma to the public. Soft-spoken, poised, and eternally loyal, Doria was known as Meghan Markle's quiet cornerstone. She had been the image of maternal stability amid the chaos of royal life. Whether it was sitting alone at Meghan's wedding in the vastness of St. George's Chapel or standing silently beside her daughter during public engagements, Doria had long remained in the shadows, never seeking attention or asserting herself into the limelight. But when she finally chose to speak, the impact was volcanic. Her revelation, that Meghan's 43% Nigerian ancestry claim was fabricated, was more than a media bombshell. It was the public cracking of a bond once thought unbreakable. In many ways, it marked the moment when the illusion of an unshakable mother-daughter alliance began to unravel before a global audience. To understand how it got to this point, one must go back to the beginning. Doria raised Meghan as a single mother in Los Angeles. By all accounts, their relationship was unusually close. Meghan has spoken openly in past interviews about the sacrifices Doria made for her, describing her as her best friend and the person who taught me how to dream. During Meghan's childhood, it was Doria who handled school drop-offs, helped with homework, and encouraged Meghan's early ambition in acting and advocacy. While Meghan maintained a distant relationship with her father, Thomas Markle, it was Doria who remained the ever-present figure of strength and consistency. During Meghan's courtship with Prince Harry, Doria became something of a fascination for the British press. She was elegant, composed, and most notably, the only member of Meghan's family to be invited to the royal wedding. The cameras often panned to her during high-profile events, as she sat alone among aristocrats and politicians, the image of grace under pressure. But after the wedding, something changed. Despite the immense platform now available to her, Doria remained silent. She avoided interviews, turned down media offers, and never capitalized on her newfound fame. Many praised her restraint. Others began to wonder why someone so central to Meghan's life was increasingly absent. The distance grew more noticeable with each passing year. She was not featured in the Oprah interview, where Meghan and Harry opened up about the racism and betrayal they experienced. She was not a vocal participant in the Netflix documentary, even though Meghan's father and half-siblings were central to many of the narratives. And she never publicly defended Meghan when the media attacks reached fever pitch. The loyal silence that once felt noble began to feel strained. Sources close to the Sussexes began to whisper that Meghan and Doria's relationship was more complicated than it appeared. Rumors swirled that Meghan, in her pursuit of crafting the perfect image, had tried to control every aspect of her story, including how her mother was portrayed. Some insiders claimed that Doria was asked to stay silent, to avoid interviews, to play the part of the quiet, dignified black mother while Meghan led the narrative. Over time, Doria reportedly began to feel sidelined, not just from Meghan's public story, but from her private life as well. According to a former staff member at Archewell, Doria was invited less frequently to family events. Her access to her grandchildren became limited. She was no longer consulted on major decisions, and her opinions, when offered, were increasingly dismissed. One source described a particularly painful moment when Doria questioned Meghan about the ancestry claim shortly after the podcast aired. Doria, who knew her lineage intimately, was reportedly shocked to hear Meghan say she was 43% Nigerian. Behind closed doors, she asked, "Where did that come from?" Meghan, according to the source, brushed her off, saying, "It's what the test showed. Don't worry about it." But Doria did worry. Not because she was concerned about public opinion, but because she feared the lie would grow beyond their control. She had spent her entire life teaching Meghan to be honest, to lead with integrity, to never become what the world expected her to be. Now, as Meghan leaned into a public identity rooted in unverified claims, Doria found herself caught between love and conscience. The internal conflict only deepened as the public began to embrace Meghan's Nigerian identity. Doria reportedly became uncomfortable watching Meghan wear African prints in photo shoots, accept praise from Nigerian leaders, and frame herself as a cultural ambassador for a nation Doria knew they had no blood connection to. It wasn't just misleading, it felt deeply disrespectful. The final straw came when Doria was approached by a daytime talk show to discuss motherhood and fame. Initially, she had no intention of addressing Meghan's DNA claim. But during the pre-show briefing, when the producers mentioned the public's interest in her reaction to the 43% figure, Doria faced a moral dilemma. She could dodge the question, offer a vague answer, or lie to protect her daughter. Or she could tell the truth. And in a moment that stunned the world, she chose the latter. The fallout was immediate. Sources say Meghan was blindsided by the interview. She had not approved it, had no idea it would air, and was reportedly watching it live when the moment unfolded. According to one staff member, Meghan was frozen in disbelief, then erupted in anger, calling it a betrayal of the highest order. What followed was an emotional phone call that quickly turned into a shouting match. Meghan, according to insiders, demanded to know why Doria would humiliate her on television. Doria, for her part, remained calm and said, "Because someone had to tell the truth." That sentence, simple and steady, marked a devastating shift in their relationship. In the days after the broadcast, Meghan and Harry's team scrambled to manage the narrative. There were internal debates over whether to issue a denial or release DNA documentation to support the original claim. But nothing came. The silence from Meghan's side became louder than any statement could have been. Doria, meanwhile, disappeared from public view. She canceled 2 previously scheduled speaking engagements and reportedly turned off her phone. Friends say she was emotionally exhausted, overwhelmed by the attention, and saddened by the rupture with her daughter. But even in her silence, the damage was done. The public now saw a rift that couldn't be unseen. The once adored image of mother and daughter standing united against a cruel world had fractured. And with it, so too did Meghan's credibility. If the one person who had always stood by her was now standing against her, what did that say about the truth behind the curtain? Meghan's critics seized the moment, declaring it proof of everything they had suspected: manipulation, dishonesty, and image obsession. Her defenders were left shaken, unsure how to reconcile their admiration with the growing evidence of fabrication. And those in the middle, the millions who had once found inspiration in Meghan's story, felt betrayed, not by a scandal, but by the shattering of something that once felt real. What hurt most wasn't just that Meghan may have lied. It was that she did so knowing the trust people had placed in her, and that when faced with correction, not from an enemy, but from her own mother, she chose to dig in rather than come clean. The Markle-Ragland rift is not just a family disagreement. It is a story of ambition overtaking authenticity, of love tested by lies, of a mother who, after years of silence, finally chose truth over allegiance. In Hollywood, image is everything. But in real life, it's the people closest to us who keep us honest. Doria tried to be that person for Meghan. But when the brand became more important than the bond, even blood couldn't hold them together. In the hallowed halls of Buckingham Palace, identity has always been more than personal, it's constitutional. Every member of the royal family, from the monarch to the distant cousins, functions within a strict framework of image, legacy, and bloodline. The British monarchy doesn't just symbolize continuity. It relies on a curated sense of tradition, heritage, and stability. So when Meghan Markle entered the royal fold, she was not merely marrying Prince Harry, she was stepping into a centuries-old institution with rules that were unwritten, yet unbreakable. At first, her presence was hailed as revolutionary. She was biracial, American, divorced, and a self-made actress. To the modern eye, she represented the monarchy's attempt at modernization, at finally reflecting the Commonwealth's diversity. But that novelty came at a steep cost, and her every move, from fashion choices to family drama, was scrutinized more viciously than perhaps any royal before her. And once Meghan began to frame her experiences within the royal family as being tied to racial bias and systemic exclusion, she took on a dual role, both royal insider and activist outsider. That balancing act was delicate. It required her to maintain a dignified link to the royal image while carving out a new identity that challenged the very institution she had married into. And when she publicly declared herself to be 43% Nigerian, it set off a ripple within the palace walls that, for a time, went unnoticed by the public. But inside royal circles, it wasn't brushed off as a quirky DNA claim. It was treated as a potential threat. According to palace insiders, the senior royals were blindsided by Meghan's statement on her podcast. No one in the inner circle had been informed of this supposed ancestry discovery. There had been no prior discussions with the palace communications office, no background briefing to ensure alignment with official narratives. In the world of royalty, where every public word is vetted, rehearsed, and often rewritten by teams of aides, such a rogue statement was seen not just as surprising, but as subversive. In the immediate aftermath, palace advisors reportedly held urgent meetings to assess the implications. It wasn't just about heritage. It was about symbolism. Meghan's 43% Nigerian claim, made without evidence and without context, suggested a deliberate attempt to distance herself even further from the British institution and draw power from an alternate identity. And to the monarchy, where titles and bloodlines are non-negotiable truths, this move seemed both reckless and political. One former royal aide, who served under King Charles during his time as Prince of Wales, described the internal reaction as one of quiet alarm. The Queen had always insisted that every member of the family represents the crown, not themselves, he said. Meghan's declaration was not about the monarchy, it was about Meghan. And in that, she crossed a line. There was also concern about how her claim might reflect on the monarchy's image in the Commonwealth, particularly in African nations. While Meghan's intent may have been to highlight shared cultural roots with millions of African descendants, the lack of proof and the spectacle it created posed a reputational risk. Some advisors feared it could be seen as performative, or worse, exploitative, using African identity as a shield in her ongoing battle with the press and the institution. King Charles, always measured and careful with his image, is said to have expressed frustration behind closed doors. He had spent years cultivating relationships with Commonwealth nations, especially in Africa, emphasizing education, environmental stewardship, and historical reconciliation. Meghan's Nigerian claim, if proven false, risked undermining those efforts by suggesting that even the royal family's newest members were willing to play fast and loose with African heritage for personal gain. Prince William, according to insiders, was livid. His relationship with Meghan had already soured following the Oprah interview, in which accusations of royal racism were implied but never directly named. To see his sister-in-law now asserting a dubious cultural claim only deepened his mistrust. Sources claim he expressed disbelief that someone so invested in authenticity and truth-telling would make such a statement without verification. It's like watching someone rewrite their own history in real time, one aide recalled him saying. Behind the scenes, Camilla, now Queen Consort, reportedly had a more skeptical reaction. According to whispers among staff, she privately mocked the idea of a duchess using a podcast to deliver something so serious. Whatever happened to issuing a statement, properly reviewed and confirmed, she allegedly remarked during a dinner conversation. Whether her words were meant with contempt or confusion is unclear, but the sentiment echoed a broader royal sentiment. Meghan was once again breaking with protocol and doing it on her terms. For the monarchy, which is built upon the sanctity of heritage and lineage, the introduction of unverifiable ancestry claims struck at the institution's very core. If a royal figure could publicly claim bloodlines without providing genealogical evidence, what message did that send about the seriousness with which the royal family treats its own history? This was not merely a matter of race. The palace, after all, has spent decades trying to navigate the legacy of colonialism, racial inequality, and its fraught relationships with African and Caribbean nations. The Queen's 1952 coronation was declared across the Commonwealth, which at the time spanned continents and cultures. But with the rise of independence movements and post-colonial reckonings, the palace has had to walk AD. So what does this identity crisis mean for Meghan? Within the royal establishment, her credibility is effectively damaged. Not necessarily because of the claim itself, but because of how it was made, unverified, unchallenged, and ultimately undermined by her own mother. For a family that traffics in symbols, this misstep wasn't just embarrassing, it was reputationally radioactive. The rift between Meghan and the palace was never solely about race. It was about power. Who controls the narrative? Who defines heritage? Who gets to speak on behalf of history? And when Meghan claimed Nigeria as part of her story, she didn't just expand her identity, she challenged the monarchy's control over storytelling. And they noticed. This chapter of the Meghan saga will not end with a retraction or a clarification. The palace will never issue a statement. Meghan may never admit fault, but the implications are lasting. The British monarchy, for all its faults, operates within a rigid framework of verifiable lineage and protocol. Meghan's decision to step outside of that structure and create her own heritage narrative was always going to be risky. And now, with the world watching, that risk has proven costly. The initial announcement had been received with overwhelming excitement. When Meghan Markle, in that now controversial podcast episode, claimed to be 43% Nigerian, a wave of pride surged through Nigeria and its vast diaspora across the globe. Social media erupted with hashtags welcoming her into the fold. Fashion designers in Lagos offered to dress her in Ankara and lace. Cultural commentators on talk shows referred to her as our sister in the diaspora. For a moment, there was joy, a rare feeling of recognition from the highest rungs of Western aristocracy. But that celebration has since soured into something far more complex: confusion, betrayal, and ultimately, anger. Nigerians are not easily swayed by flattery. Despite existing in a country that often finds itself caricatured in international media, Nigeria is proud, fiercely so. National pride pulses through the veins of its people. Whether it's football, music, literature, or global innovation, Nigerians rally around excellence, culture, and identity. So when Meghan Markle identified as nearly half Nigerian, the assumption, especially given her global influence, was that she would embrace the culture authentically, with humility, and with intent. Instead, what followed her bold claim was silence. No elaboration. No effort to trace family lineage. No meaningful engagement with Nigerian historians, cultural ambassadors, or the people. What was expected to blossom into a cross-cultural bridge never grew past a fleeting soundbite. And now, in the wake of Doria Ragland's public contradiction that there was no known Nigerian blood in their lineage, the emotional tide in Nigeria has turned sharply. On the streets of Lagos, once bustling with excitement over the Duchess' unexpected connection, the mood has shifted. Vendors who had jokingly named products after Meghan have taken the names down. Influencers who once celebrated the link are quietly deleting or hiding their old posts. The disappointment is personal. In Abuja, a prominent Nigerian television host opened her program with a direct message. We embraced her. We gave her a home in our hearts. And now it feels like that trust was played with for clout. That sentiment echoed throughout the nation. In universities across the country, where genealogy and diaspora studies have gained momentum in recent years, professors weighed in on the controversy. Dr. Chuka Okonkwo, an anthropologist at the University of Nigeria Nsukka, expressed deep concern. We do not take identity lightly. It is spiritual. It is communal. You do not simply try on Nigerian heritage like a costume and then discard it when it no longer serves you. For many, Meghan's alleged deception was not just offensive. It was a replication of a long, painful pattern. Throughout history, African identity has been commodified by outsiders. In the colonial era, artifacts were taken from shrines and palaces and displayed in European museums. Traditions were mocked, erased, or exoticized for entertainment. In more recent times, Black identity has been selectively embraced by Western media when convenient, but never fully honored. Meghan's DNA claim, if truly unfounded, was seen by many as a continuation of that erasure, wrapped in modern branding. The anger wasn't just academic or philosophical, it was emotional. A Nigerian fashion entrepreneur, Amina Aladil, who had posted a viral video offering to design a traditional Yoruba outfit for Meghan, broke down in tears during a follow-up post. I was so proud. So honored. I told my daughters that even royalty has Nigerian roots. Now, what'd I tell them? That she lied? That we were foolish for believing? This wasn't just a media moment. It had filtered into households, classrooms, churches, and mosques. People had felt a connection. And when that connection was exposed as potentially fabricated, it cut deeper than any ordinary scandal. Compounding the frustration was the fact that Meghan remained silent even after her mother's televised contradiction. Nigerian opinion leaders began demanding answers. High-profile figures in media and politics issued open letters. One such letter, penned by a former Nigerian minister of culture, read, "It is not enough to claim us when it is trendy. Either you are with us, fully, honestly, respectfully, or you are not." The idea of performative allyship is not new. Many in Nigeria have become adept at recognizing when global figures align themselves with Africa for optics or temporary gain. Meghan's situation brought those suspicions back into the spotlight. What began as a celebration of shared heritage now felt like a strategic ploy, a way to deepen her brand's credibility among African and African-American audiences without genuine investment in the culture. In a country like Nigeria, where thousands of years of culture, family, and tribe inform identity, this kind of perceived dishonesty is not just frustrating, it is infuriating. Nigerians are known for their hospitality, but they also demand reciprocity. Respect, once broken, is not easily restored. The wave of disappointment wasn't confined to individuals. Cultural institutions also began to retract their previously extended goodwill. One prominent Nigerian university that had been considering awarding Meghan an honorary degree quietly abandoned the plan. Organizers of an African Women's Leadership Conference, who had been in talks to invite Meghan as a keynote speaker, announced that they would no longer be moving forward with the invitation. Their statement was short but powerful. Representation must be rooted in truth. There were also political ramifications. In certain circles, Meghan's name had been discussed as a potential bridge between African diaspora communities and Western institutions. Her influence, name recognition, and narrative as a modern woman of color navigating systemic adversity made her an appealing voice. Some envisioned her spearheading educational campaigns, health initiatives, or cultural preservation projects in West Africa. But after the controversy, those plans stalled. The sense of betrayal cast a long shadow. Nigerian social media, always vibrant and expressive, turned into a space of reckoning. Twitter threads dissected Meghan's past interviews. Instagram posts paired photos of Meghan in traditional African-inspired attire with captions accusing her of playing dress-up. TikTok creators posted satirical skits portraying Meghan getting her DNA results from a fictional company called Cloud Ancestry. What hurt the most, according to many Nigerians, was not the lack of ancestry, it was the lack of respect. If Meghan had issued a statement clarifying the claim, or even admitted that the test results were unclear or possibly flawed, the backlash might have softened. Nigerians, like most people, value honesty. But instead, her silence felt like confirmation that the heritage claim had served its purpose and was no longer useful. A cultural journalist in Port Harcourt summed it up best. When she said she was Nigerian, we were quick to welcome her. We laughed. We danced. We told our children. But now we see we were just a page in her script. And she's already flipped to the next. This reaction was not born of bitterness alone. It was born of a long history of being seen and used but never truly heard. Meghan's situation touched a nerve not because she's the first to misrepresent ancestry, but because she had the platform to get it right and chose not to. Amid the anger, however, there was also reflection. Some Nigerians used the moment to re-examine the broader issue of diaspora identity. The reality is, many African Americans and mixed-race individuals genuinely don't know their precise heritage. The horrors of slavery severed genealogical lines. DNA tests, for all their scientific flaws, are often the only path available. And when those tests suggest connections, however broad or unconfirmed, it can lead to emotional resonance and longing. So part of the Nigerian disappointment also included a sense of empathy. There was an understanding that perhaps Meghan, like many others, was searching for connection in a world that had historically denied her one. But empathy requires accountability. The search for belonging does not excuse exaggeration or opportunism. There was also a plea, made by cultural leaders and academics alike, for education. One professor at the University of Lagos called for a global DNA literacy campaign, explaining that people needed to understand what these ancestry percentages actually mean, how they're calculated, and how they can be misused. He said, "This isn't just about Meghan. This is about a generation being marketed identity as a product. We need to teach them how to read the label." As Nigeria continues to process the betrayal, the conversation is evolving. There are calls for Meghan to visit the country, not for a photo opportunity, but for a cultural immersion. To walk the streets, to meet the people, to engage with the realities of Nigerian life. Some believe that such a visit could be the beginning of healing. Others argue that the damage is already done, and trust cannot be rebuilt on hollow apologies. Whatever path Meghan chooses, one thing is clear. Nigeria will not be a silent backdrop to anyone's identity performance. It is a nation of voices. Loud, loving, critical, and unapologetically proud. And when those voices are misused, they speak back. In a jaw-dropping moment that stopped millions in their tracks, Doria Ragland shattered Meghan's carefully crafted identity with just one sentence. "There's no Nigerian blood in our line." She made that up. The claim that Meghan was 43% Nigerian, a cornerstone of her cultural branding, is now unraveling in real time. Experts are speaking out. Receipts are missing. And Nigerians around the world are demanding answers. This isn't just a family disagreement, it's a global reckoning. Stay with us, because what you're about to hear will flip the entire Meghan Markle narrative upside down.